Today's exercise is about using a spectrum to understand how you're feeling at the moment and using your own nervous system to help move your place along that spectrum. I'm going to share a diagram. So in this case, here's you, and here's a spectrum. It can represent a lot of different things. You have a middle place where you're not really feeling either of the extremes, and then an increasing amount of the extremes, and then eventually off the cliff. And it can happen on either side. More and more of this thing, and then too much pushes you over. No matter what subject you're thinking about, we are always moving along the spectrum. And one of the important things that using a spectrum shows us is that our position is not fixed. So we're seeing our possibilities. When you're looking at a spectrum, you're evaluating where am I and where would I like to be? And then also, how can I move? What actions can I do that will change my position on this spectrum? So in this case today, we're going to talk about connection and independence as the two ends of the spectrum. And each of us is always feeling different levels of connection or independence. It can be especially hard when you're physically alone to be in touch with that part of you that feels connected. On the end of the spectrum, when you have too much connection, you have no alone time, you don't have the quiet that you need, then you get overstimulated. And that'll be at a different place for different people, but everyone has a limit where it's too much. On the other end of the spectrum, you can have solitude and independence in increasing amounts, and then eventually that'll be too much. And one word to describe this is lonely. This can be especially an important thing to take note of for people in recovery because solitude can remind us of the destructive pattern of drinking or using that we had. And because connection is one of the best ways to get reintegrated when we're in recovery. Usually someone who goes into recovery, one of the first pieces of advice that they get is to avoid isolation. And yet here we are in isolation. So we need to understand how to push our mindset along the spectrum. So the first thing I'll have you do is rate how you're feeling right now, and maybe a second rating for your average feeling over the last, say, couple weeks or a month. In this model, we're talking about the way the nervous system is reacting to different scenarios. And the state of your central nervous system is always changing. And you have a lot of power to give it inputs that will help it change in either direction. In the general model, it looks like this. I like this representation because it's like a rainbow. And on one side of the rainbow, you have the lightning storm, and that represents the sympathetic part of the nervous system being in an activated state. And you feel anxiety or you feel a drive to do actions. On the other side, you have the snowflakes representing a cold or frozen feeling. Some people might say paralysis, or also despair, depression can feel like that. And that's modulated by what we call the dorsal vagal system. And that results in immobilization. So you really don't want too much of either side. You want to be in this middle part, as represented in the next diagram. So here's our person, and they're moving back and forth. In this middle section, they feel like they can manage. So our goal is always just to push ourselves back to that middle place. Um, One thing to note is that this middle area between the two extremes, that area is reduced by trauma, and that can be either long-term or short-term. So when we're under a lot of stress, the tolerance that we have for either extreme gets much smaller. And when we've had a history of trauma, abuse, addiction, eating disorders, those kind of things leave a mark on our nervous system with the narrowing of this window of tolerance. So the thing that this system helps you to do is to know what to do about how you're feeling. So in this specific case, do you need soothing or activation? For instance, when I'm feeling anxious, taking a bath is my very favorite thing to do. And sometimes I get in the bath and I just feel like I'm crawling out of my skin. It's not satisfying. I just want to get right back out. And that means what I actually needed in that moment was to take some action. And so getting some fresh air with the dog would have been a much better choice, or having one song to dance to, or putting things away for 15 minutes. Some kind of motion is what my body was actually craving in that moment, not the relaxation of a bath. So, our goal in all of this is to understand where we are on the spectrum and to keep in mind that it is always a spectrum, it's not black and white. So, when you go back to this beginning, we're not experiencing either connection or independence. We're experiencing both of them all the time, and it's about making a balance between them. It's also about watching out for these warning signs when we're getting towards the very end. Okay, I have had 5 Zoom meetings today, and that's been really good for my connection, but it's getting to be too much. So I'm going to get some quiet time. Or I've been really enjoying just hunkering down with my book or my TV show, and I'm enjoying quiet time and privacy, and then suddenly this is too much. I think I'll give a friend a call right now and get some connection to balance that out. So I hope that you understood this little introduction to the different parts of your nervous system and how they interact. And most important message to take away from this is that we have the power with our actions to affect our nervous system, to affect our mindset, and to change our mood and move it along that spectrum.